Yeah, there's the restroom. Okay, hey, okay, go ahead. Ro is my student in English, 1020 this semester, and he's interviewing me right now on Woodstock.
All right. So when we look at Woodstock 1969 from the lens of like the present, it's hard not to like juxtapose it with the political climate of the 1960s as well, like the nearing the end of the civil rights movements, the anti-war movements, and even the start of the Green movement.
Good.
But at that time, was the intention behind Woodstock to like capture the idea of counterculture, or was it just like to throw an amazing rock festival?
So I think the original people who produced the festival, the young men, and that's in one of the books that I just gave you, Young Men with Unlimited Capital. I think they were rich and somewhat naive, kind of vacation hipsters or weekend hipsters. And they partnered with Michael Lang, who was definitely part of the counterculture. And they just had this idea to put on a major music festival. And I think, peace, love, and art, or whatever, is the, tagline. But I think originally it was meant to be a very sort of mainstream bohemian experience, much like today we have the more famous derivatives like Coachella and Bonnaroo. But the thing about today's festival scene is it's so oversaturated. Every weekend of the year, there are major music festivals, multiple festivals every single weekend. And then when it's cold here in North America, they have festivals that are on in Mexico and other destinations, and they even have festival cruises where you can go be on a boat. I actually knew somebody who worked on the boats and so they still had a lot of festivals in the 60s, but they didn't really have like massive or large festivals the way that we do now. And Woodstock, as we were talking the other day, was much larger, 500,000 people, much larger than today's music festivals, and with much less logistics. So I think the cultural aspect became a thing. But I think one of the things is I think the promoters realized if they didn't kind of get buy-in from the hippies, the heads, and also the activist scene, that they would be perceived as being evil or part of the man or in any way contrary to the counterculture. And so they did work directly with some counterculture organizations trying to like maintain a harmonious relationship with the hip scene, but they also were working with the state of New York, law enforcement, and major capitalist, investors. And so they sort of walked a tightrope. The most overt thing that I can think of right now that comes to my mind that I think is so important about Woodstock is that they did work also with a hip community from California called the Hog Farm, under the leadership of a poet and comedian and all around kind of like loving weirdo called Wavy Gravy. And Wavy Gravy and the Hog Farm were hired to sort of be food and vibes control. When you go to a festival like Bonnaroo, that's really spent a great amount of time looking at the same issues that Woodstock did from a similar perspective, but with more level heads. They have, for example, people that help with garbage and people who are having bad experiences from substances that they might have ingested, and just taking care of the general. They created the Bonnaroo Code, which is a general idea to take care of each other. And I think that Bonnaroo Code, radiate positivity, and the whole vibe of it does descend directly from the Woodstock and from the great festivals of the United Kingdom. Like the Glastonbury Festival is a long-running festival in the United Kingdom that has a very Woodstocky sort of spirit. But I think Woodstock as the 3-day event in 1969 August in upstate New York, in White Lake, New York, about an hour from the town of Woodstock, will never not be a symbol of the 60s. But I think one can argue that it was the most ridiculously superficial, over the top, kind of like it was the 60s writ large on a large canvas with worldwide media coverage that was unstoppable because of the fact that they basically shut down that region of New York, and it became the foci of the entire world really for a couple of days.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is like the news stories like immediately after were like condescending towards Woodstock, like in the sense that they were describing like the mud, the rain, the traffic, um, the large amount of drug use, and a large amount of like drug-related incidents. Um, but then when the documentary came out in 1970, it won an Academy Award and like um, boosted the appearance of Woodstock to like the general public.
So I know somebody who's a little bit older than me that described being like a high school student and going to see that movie in the movie theater, and it completely changing everything for them. And that was something that I think kids in rural parts of North America and all over the world, in small towns and suburbs and bedroom communities, were mesmerized by that film. And I think it did create the mythology. But I think it's really important to say that the film and the subsequent studies of Woodstock is a mythology. It's not, the event itself was kind of a train wreck in many regards. And I think just to be like on the most mundane. So my spouse attends festivals with me, but she was kind of a newbie to the festival scene when she and I got together. And I remember taking her to the first Bonnaroo. And one of the great concerns that we had at Bonnaroo was personal hygiene, showers and bathrooms. And today at Bonnaroo, they have a lot greater infrastructure. But there were some pretty, we encountered some pretty nasty porta potties at the Bonnaroo that she went to, the first one, that the trucks just hadn't gotten to them yet. And you had to like close the door and walk away and wish you hadn't opened the door. So take that many times larger than Bonnaroo, 500,000 people, and many, 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 many fewer amenities than Bonnaroo. People were shitting, in the woods and on the field and probably in those lakes and ponds. You see these pictures of these, and of course everybody loves the naked hip. Like everybody loves the naked hippie. I mean, what's there not to like about the naked hippie? The naked hippie is this icon of beauty and innocence and joy and love. And so you have, and when they started having festivals in Texas, like, the rednecks would come from miles around when they had hip rock festivals in Texas, just to see if they would see a naked woman hippie, like in the out in the wild in her natural environments. So you see these pictures of, the naked kids bathing in the pond. People were probably pooping in the pond too and peeing in the pond too. I mean, it was gross, And so, and had it lasted more than a couple of days, it would have been an unmitigated health disaster. And the fact that all of the kind of townsfolk in that area that were generally very rural, the only thing different about that part of New York and the rural, they're very conservative, is that there's a lot more Jewish people there than rural Jewish people than anywhere else that I know of in North America. So it's not the same as here because of how, sort of Baptist everything is in terms of rural Tennessee. But it was, those people all started bringing food. All the local neighbors brought food. They were airlifting food. I mean, the world responded to bring enough supplies to the people. And you'll see the footage of them eating, like granola out of a giant garbage can filled with granola. And everybody was getting just this little bowl full of granola out of this gigantic, like thing. So I think that that they were able to maintain peace. There's not the violence. There's an Altamont festival in California a couple months later that the Rolling Stones headlined, that was supposed to be Woodstock West, where a man was knifed to death by the Hells Angels, during the Rolling Stones set. And there was just a kind of a dark cloud, a dark pall of bad vibes that fell over Altamont. They often link Altamont to Charles Manson, to the idea of that the 60s really weren't all ooey gooey. It was really, there was a lot of like negative energy associated with the 60s. And the Woodstock didn't seem to have that like dark negative vibe. And I think that's because of the music. Some of the Stones music at that time and what Mick Jagger was exemplifying as his version of kind of the Bacchus Dionysus figure of the kind of the hip messiah. Mick Jagger had sort of a demonic aspect to him. I mean, he's singing songs like Sympathy for the Devil, which is a phenomenal rock and roll song, while the Hells Angels are beating the crap out of the fans right in front of him. It was demonically dark that way at Altamont. And Woodstock doesn't have And when I've been there twice to visit the actual site, and they've turned it into a museum and a concert venue, and it's a gorgeous, well maintained, highly respectable tribute to the legend. And I met the second time I was there, this woman, who was there. I mean, people come back just to be there. It's a hippie pilgrim site. It would be like going to like a religious site in a holy land. It is a mecca of that, and then the museum is very faithful to the questions that I'm kind of avoiding, but it definitely embraced the moment of that movement against the war in Vietnam in particular. Clearly, the content of the concert and the spirit of the fact that these were young people who the males who were at Woodstock were at Woodstock, and they weren't, in Southeast Asia in a very bloody and unfortunate conflict, unavoidable conflict that the U.S. foreign policy brought us to. So, but I would say Woodstock was all of the things. It's all the things that you think it is, probably, and a lot more that we haven't even figured out yet.
It's like a common term they used to describe Woodstock was like its own island, its own like temporary city where like everything's kind of ran on its own terms, like pretty much, and like there were no like at the moment there were no like consequences of like anything. So
well, like today, sociologists and radical philosophers will call that a utopia, a temporary utopia, or there's a phrase called the temporary autonomous zone. And Woodstock was that. It was its own society for that. And today, the Burning Man Festival, in particular, of all the major festivals, they really sever the reality a little bit more severely than the commercial festivals. It's still like going to like a football game or a basketball. There's the beer truck, there's the burrito truck, there's the T-shirt and the merch stand at Burning Man. Once you enter Burning Man, there's no commerce. They just disallow money inside of Burning Man, and it's out in the desert, and so it creates a kind of surrealist, otherworldliness to it. There's also a smaller festival that started right around the time of Woodstock called the Rainbow Gathering, and those are held once a year in a forest in the summer. And there's no money exchanged at rainbow gatherings. It's all given on I mean, they do, I think, pass the hat to buy food, but they're literally, it's a non-commercial event. It's overtly non-commercial. And I think that aspect, and it's free. The rainbow gatherings are free. Burning Man, you have to pay, I think, to get in the door. But I guess those two examples would be a perfect example of the fact that Americans hunger for these kinds of experiences. I mean, if you think about, like, for example, this is a really like mainstream example of it, but the insanity around Taylor Swift tickets.
Oh yeah.
People want to experience the thing. They want to be in the room when the thing happens. They want to hear that song played that particular way. They go for the collaborate. The big festivals today have a lot of collaborations. People who aren't usually together are together, so they can let me bring up my friends, and they all come up on the stage.
So like people aren't necessarily drawn to the music, but more of like the idea of the utopian society.
They're drawn to the experience that they can't have at home.
Yeah.
You can't watch it on Netflix. You can't watch. So like when the pandemic started and then we started having all these like Zoom concerts. I mean, I was because I was stuck at home with like everybody else in the early pandemic. We all really abided by the sense of lockdown. I needed to watch those Zoom concerts, but they became quickly sour. Like they were the first thing that I was like, get me off of my computer. I love doing stuff on my computer, but I don't want to be live music. I want to experience it. I don't want to be virtually baptized. I want to go get dunked in the creek. And I don't want to get, virtually fed. I don't want to eat like a little pill in the morning that has all of my nutrients in it, like in a science fiction movie. I want to eat like messy food. And I think that with Woodstock, it was definitely like you had to be there. But I imagine during the experience itself, there was a lot of discomfort. There was a lot of, lack of comfort, really. And I think a lot of testing of one's limits. I think there is like a religious rite of passage, the word we use today, that's a fancy word, is very overused and probably inappropriate. Sometimes uses like shamanic, but it's like you go through this, vortex, this ritual where you come out on the other side of it and you're forever transformed. And I believe for sure, based on all the books and literature and studying I've done of this topic, that everyone who attended that festival was radically transformed by the festival. And even though it began as a as a sellout. I mean, the hip, the left edge of the hip would have said it's a sellout festival. It's a commercial music festival for the man. It's capitalism in its most perfect form. Well, they realized within the first day that they hadn't built enough ticket booths, they hadn't built enough fencing. They realized that there was absolutely no way that they could possibly charge money for it, so it became a free festival. And then the thing about that is that after that, the kids wanted all the festivals to be free. They tried to have a Woodstock by train in Canada, and it was a train that went from Eastern Canada all the way from Western Canada. It stopped off in every different city, and they did a festival. You can watch this on I think it's on Amazon Prime, called Festival Express. And there was a riot in every city because the kids were ready for all the music to be free. Like, the kids were done paying for music. And people talk about today, like, oh, the entitled youth, they want to get their music for free off the internet. Back in the day, I had to buy a CD. You're not supporting the artist. Well, of course, I buy all the T-shirts. I buy the posters. So I support them in other ways. But like back in the day, kids, they all wanted the music for free then too. There's something about music that and what you end up having is you have a handful of artists. Taylor Swift, an example, but my favorite band, U2, is extremely self-centered and rich in this regard. They Grateful Dead, same. They're extremely wealthy. The ones that are still alive, several of them have passed on. But you have a handful of extraordinarily wealthy and successful artists, and then you have like so many people. There's the whole myth of the starving artist. Well, that's because most of us are. Most of us don't make any money off of our art. It's a labor of love.
So, do you think Woodstock holds more significance as a symbol of counterculture in the 1960s, or kind of holds more significance as an untapped market for festivals and like the youth? Because right after Woodstock, and after the commercial success of not the festival but the movie, music corporations realized that they should be advertising towards the young people, and the youth define the trends, and ever since then, the youth started defining the trends. So,
right. So you would have these little boutiques. You could go to a big city, and you have like a little section of that city where you have these little boutiques, and you could get, you could buy your paraphernalia. And some of that would be like the health stuff and the drug stuff, but a lot of it would just be the clothing, the fashion, the music, the stickers, the posters, like that. And today, the commercialization of hip is so incredibly mainstream. So even like the Sex Pistols, who are considered by some to be the first punk band, they were a marketing stunt. The idea of the Sex Pistols was dreamed up as a kind of a marketing. Now there's lots of DIY in the punk movement that was a rebellion against the commercialization of the hippie movement, and that was truly grassroots. But then you get like to Green Day. And when my daughter's coming up in the early zeros, she gets into punk, and there's Hot Topic at the shopping mall, and you go and buy your alternative brand at the store. And I love it. Happens in class all the time, where I ask students about the T-shirt they're wearing. That's a band. That's some retro band T-shirt, and they don't even know the music of the band T-shirt that they're wearing. So they bought into the whole idea that it's there's a French philosopher called Jean Baudrillard. He called it the simulacrum. It's just the image of the image. It's no longer the thing, the thing itself. And so I think for me personally, like, the lineage that goes through the Rainbow Gathering and the Burning Man tradition is a lot more interesting to me than the Woodstock lineage that goes through Bonnaroo. But like, I'll spend $500 on Bonnaroo. Like, I'm happy to spend the money. Like, take my money here. Let me write you a check right now. I want the experience so badly. I love it. But I think from the 60s, the more significant events were the large mobilizations against the Vietnam War, the communes that people started out in the woods, the spiritual stuff that you and I were talking about before we got on tape, the exposure to like vegetarianism, ecology, the exposure to altered states of consciousness as being a religious thing. So I think what we actually have from the moment of Woodstock is we have the more access. People in North America and people in developed worlds now have developed countries have so much more access to ideas and to experiences than they ever had before, and that things that were once seen as kind of like edgy are very, very mainstream. And today we had what what they call the Wu to Q pipeline. And so where you have, it's not even a liberal or conservative thing anymore. You have conservative kind of hippies and you have liberal or left-wing hippies. It's like post-partisan, like, so you have like very, like, I call them crunchy conservatives. You know, they eat in the health food restaurant, they're into home birth, they wear the all natural clothing, you know, but they're like MAGA red hats, you know, all day long, because you know that natural. And even if you fall into like the anti-vax movement and the health and yoga movement, there's a lot of things that are contested today that are really the Woodstock phenomenon coming full circle to where it's so mainstream. You know, like nowadays, like men wearing their hair differently is just not, it's not even like remotely controversial. You know, like a man with long hair, you know, is not controversial. Now a man in a dress today has gotten all of a sudden very controversial here in Tennessee, but we're not here to talk about that. You've got a class to get to.
And like the last question.
Okay, last question.
If you could go back to Woodstock and experience someone's set.
So my wife will kill me for not saying like Creedence Clearwater Revival or Jimi Hendrix, but my two absolute favorite sets, hands down, the Friday folk music set of Joan Baez, because I'm a huge folkie. I love Joan Baez, and I love what she talked about her then husband who was in jail for draft resistance. I'm going to say three sets. My top three sets will probably be Joan Baez, the Jefferson Airplane breakfast set, for absolutely, I think, you know, as huge as the Dead still are. I can't believe that more people aren't talking about Jefferson Airplane. I think Jefferson Airplane were one of the most incredible bands of all time. So the morning, and they ended up playing Sunday morning. It was supposed to be late Saturday night, but it turned into Sunday morning. Jefferson Airplane's Sunday breakfast set. And I'll have to add the Country Joe set that we talked about the other day. So actually those three sets, I can't limit it to one, but my top three Woodstock sets would have to be Joan Baez, Country Joe and the Fish, and Jefferson Airplane. But it was hard to say that. You know who else I really liked is Arlo Guthrie, and this guy isn't much anymore, but John Sebastian was really something else. He had the outfit that was all tie-dyed denim from head to toe, like tie-dyed jeans, he had a denim jacket that was tie-dyed. Go look up the John Sebastian outfit. Your whole group should go up to White Lake, New York, and visit the museum this summer. It is the most incredible place. And the field, I mean, just to stand on that field. The first time I went without Jeannie, I got there, I put the headphones, I put these on and started listening to the sets that were actually played there in like really good sound, like right there on that field. It was amazing. Ro, you got to get to class. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You can't probably hear my student, and he's not on camera, but I just made a tape of me being interviewed about Woodstock for class. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Bye.